When a wastelander hears vertibirds droning overhead, or the rhythmic pounding of power armor in the distance, they tend to associate these experiences with their knights in shining armor, the Brotherhood of Steel, or possibly the likes of the NCR for those living in the comfort of California. For some, they breathe a sigh of relief as they recognize the protection these factions offer, so long as they don't have the technology to be taken or land to be settled. However, the first few generations of wastelanders emerging from the safety of great underground vaults in a post-war America had a very different response to these sounds. Before the sound of vertibirds in the night sky signaled a savior, they signaled something much worse. A terrible omen. A sign of horror to come. A sign of the Enclave. In the events of 2241, occurring along the coastline of California, the Enclave emerged from the shadows, acting as a primary antagonist to all peaceful settlements. Under the guise of saving the wasteland, they were bent on destroying virtually all civilized life in their search for purity. The Enclave began raiding vaults, killing their inhabitants, and enslaving those who were not lucky enough to die. They eradicated a settlement of intelligent and peaceful Deathclaws, and posed as an unstoppable force against the only major factions that had enough power to stand up to them, a budding new California Republic and the Brotherhood of Steel. Despite the Enclave's inferior numbers, their mysterious origins and technological superiority made them a force of true havoc, unopposed across the breadth of the wasteland. Against this unstoppable force, a lone figure, seemingly insignificant against the looming conflict, would set on a path that would ultimately tip the scales of power in the wasteland. This figure, known to us as the Chosen One, and a tribal descendant of the legendary Vault Dweller from Vault 13, managed to track down the location of the Enclave's secretive headquarters, the Poseidon Oil Rig. This offshore drilling rig not only housed the majority of Enclave forces, but also held many branches of government still in use by these post-war Americans, including their positions of president and Secret Service. While many tales of the Chosen One's deeds vary from account to account, what is certain is that after a daring assault and an unlikely victory, the Chosen One managed to set forth a series of events that led to the ultimate destruction of the Poseidon Oil Rig. The explosion that took place here eradicated the majority of Enclave forces and scattered the survivors. In the aftermath of this devastation, most survivors fled east, with many getting as far as Raven Rock on the outskirts of the capital wasteland in Washington, D.C., while others opted to stay close to home, attempting to integrate into the NCR, or take their chances with the frontier. For those who fled east and didn't make it to the coast, rumors circulate that they may still be operating in scattered chapters around the wasteland. Rumors that may have more truth to them than previously thought. A portion of Enclave forces stayed loyal to their orders, retaining their fortifications in the region and continuing operations like normal. However, these unlucky soldiers would soon find themselves embroiled in a grisly and grueling war against the combined forces of the NCR and Brotherhood of Steel. In a series of assaults on their strongholds, the Enclave would face loss after loss until the remaining survivors were forced to flee. Aboard a vertibird fleeing from the assault on Navarro, an Enclave fire squad looks back on their destruction, with a lone soldier among them, lamenting the death of America. In the years following the destruction of the Enclave leadership, the NCR and Brotherhood have grown their size and influence, and new powers like Caesar's Legion have risen to control large numbers of troops and territory. The survivors of the Enclave, though well trained and equipped, simply can no longer hope to match the size of these factions. In their desolation, the surviving Enclave members in the West have obscured their identities and retreated into hiding, with some even living right under the noses of the NCR Rangers who hunt them across the wastes. On the outskirts of New Vegas, in a town known as Freeside, A mysterious and enigmatic man with a peculiar name can be found hidden away in the back corners of an old Mormon fort. This man, known to us as Arcade, works as a doctor and researcher for a humanitarian faction known as the Followers of the Apocalypse. While tight-lipped about his past, it's soon discovered by the courier that Arcade was the son of a well-respected soldier in the Enclave, and that while his father may be deceased, his father's squad is still very much alive, living separate lives scattered throughout the Mojave wastes. The internal conflict he feels weighs heavily upon his conscience. On one hand, the Enclave were ethically monstrous, and all of their members are either directly or indirectly responsible for war crimes. On the other hand, though, the members of his father's squad were the only family he has ever known, and he loves and admires them, looking back nostalgically on the time they all spent together. Amidst the shadow of the looming conflict with the NCR and Caesar's Legion, Arcade begins to ponder his origins under a new light. After spending the better part of 40 years in hiding, perhaps the Enclave Remnants can make amends, digging up their old gear for one last hurrah, this time for the good of the people in the wasteland. Arcade soon embarks on a journey to reunite his estranged family, tracking down the remnants to the corners of the Mojave. The first of many, Captain Judah Krager, was second in command to Arcade's father, Mark, and the new commanding officer of the remnants following his death. In the aftermath of the assault on Navarro, Krager spent the majority of his time as a trader. However, after years of wandering the wastes, he grew tired of this constant droning and opted to settle down just outside of Vegas in a small settlement known as Westside. Like Arcade, Krager reminisces on this time of his life and laments the loss of the sense of purpose that serving had given him. While ruthless in their approach, he always felt that the Enclave had the best intentions at heart, bringing civilization to a cruel and twisted wasteland. Judah was a good officer, tactically minded and fair in his dealings, leading to great respect amongst his troops. Respect that even managed to keep the two diametrically opposed soldiers under his command from tearing each other apart limb by limb. One of these troopers is known as Cannibal Johnson. In his heyday, Johnson acted as the squad's sharpshooter and marksman. While he never truly agreed with or supported the Enclave's mission, often aligning more with the ideals of the NCR, he reluctantly continued his service despite his issues, up until the day the squad fled Navarro. During his service, Johnson would do all he could to disrupt operations, from disobeying orders to undermining mission objectives, doing all he could to serve without serving. This behavior often landed him in hot water, but to everyone's surprise, never getting him directly court-martialed. In the aftermath of Navarro, Johnson fled east to the Mojave with the rest of his squad, eventually settling down with a tribal woman, whom he married. In the years that followed, his wife would pass away, leaving him to tackle life alone once again. Feeling guilt over his service with the Enclave, Johnson secluded himself to a cave in eastern Vegas, awaiting the day that the Reaper comes to claim him. In stark contrast to Johnson, the other of the two soldiers that Krager would often have to wrangle is known as Orion Moreno. Moreno was the heavy weapons expert of the squad, a firm patriot and supporter of the Enclave's mission and ideals. During his service with the organization, he never viewed the Enclave as anything other than America, one unbroken chain from President Washington to Richardson. Because of this, he never questioned orders or critically analyzed the Enclave's legitimacy or the efficacy of the Enclave's operations. In fact, Moreno delighted in the massacring of targets, expressing that it was war, and those who didn't turn tail when they saw him deserved what was coming. In the aftermath of Navarro, Moreno grew a deep resentment for the NCR, resulting in him having never moved on from the events that occurred on that fateful day. Viewing himself as a hero of a war that his side lost, he yearns to relive his glory days. During the reunion with his old squad, Moreno expresses a strong desire to take the fight to the NCR, to take his revenge for what they did to the Enclave at Navarro. While Krager always had his hands full with these two hotheads, the other troopers under his command proved to be less of a headache. Daisy Whitman, the squad's vertibird pilot, was removed from the politics of the organization, as she only cared about one thing: flying. During her time with the Enclave, Daisy flew 71 combat missions, a dozen of which with Mark Gannon's squad, including the fateful mission where Gannon Sr., sadly, lost his life. In the wake of Navarro's destruction, Daisy flew the squad east to the Remnants bunker outside of Las Vegas. It was here that the squad stowed their old uniforms and wandered out into the wastes to start a new life. Daisy never forgot her time in the Enclave, however, frequently reminiscing on her time as a pilot, the freedom it granted her, the time she would risk punishment by taking the scenic routes back to base, to the time she crashed a vertibird out by Klamath, barely escaping with her life. After moving out to the Mojave, Daisy kept in close contact with Arcade, becoming a second mother to him of sorts, and his only true confidant in this harsh life. In the years following her grounding, Daisy had found relative happiness in her new life as a scavenger. However, that doesn't stop her from peering into the skies, hoping to fly one last time. Last but not least is Dr. Henry, the team scientist, and a relative oddity amongst the remnants. Like Johnson, Henry wasn't too fond of the Enclave or their practices, and actively broke with the organization prior to the destruction of the Poseidon oil rig, almost certainly saving his life. Henry managed to successfully integrate into the NCR and even set up his own clinic in the budding nation. In addition to this, he was also very open about his time in the Enclave. On at least one occasion, talked about it in length with a patient during a period of inebriation. It's unclear how long Henry was set up in the NCR, but he did eventually move on, having spent time traveling with some caravans. In the aftermath of the NCR's attack on Navarro, Henry relocated to the Mojave where the other Enclave remnants had settled. It's in this endless desert that he would finally find new purpose in the budding settlement of Jacobstown. When Henry was with the Enclave, he was actively working on a cure for supermutants, and with Marcus's blessing, began to use that prior knowledge to help cure the Nightkin of their schizophrenia. After Arcade reunites with each member of the Remnants, they agree to meet at their bunker in the mountains west of Vegas, a bunker with a passcode, split between the 5 of them. Dear old friends, remember Navarro. A fitting phrase to end this journey. The results of this reunion are vague at best, but rumor has it that a vertibird has been spotted frequenting the skies of the Mojave, and Arcade hasn't been seen since.